I'd like to start, I think, big picture. It's probably the best place to start, and then we'll drill down into the data. So let's try and set the field on the back of that excellent presentation. How does the industry feel in terms of the playing field? Is it level? Are all players treated equally? You both represent multinationals. Do you feel that multinationals are treated at the same level as Hungarian companies, or perhaps we should say specific Hungarian companies? You don't need to name them, but we all know that some companies are closer to the government than others. So let's start with that playing field question. And Colette, I'll start with you.
I would say it's a very provocative question to start with.
Thank you. I'll take that as a compliment.
Yeah, so I mean, if I think about the pharma sector specifically, my perspective is I don't believe that there's an unequal playing field.
Yeah.
I think if you take a look at any maybe moment in time, there could be a perception that maybe there's a legislation or something that favors a Hungarian company, or at a different moment in time maybe favors more the multinational companies. But I mean, from my perspective, when I hear that type of question, and I'm not sure if this is kind of your intention, and I don't think it is, but it almost makes me think of, are we competing? And in my perspective, I actually don't believe that we're competing against one another. I actually believe that we have a very common purpose, which is to get our drugs to Hungarian citizens, to improve the health of Hungarian citizens. And I think that's a big point of what we're focused on. So in many ways, I think that there's opportunities where we could actually drive even more synergy in working together. We have the 4 industry groups right now that are separated and kind of work on behalf of kind of their own specific interests. And I do think there's an opportunity when you consider the fact that we work with the same payer, for the same country and the same citizens, to actually drive some synergies. And if I think of, a specific example, without maybe, maybe even mentioning one Hungarian firm. I mean, you think of like a very successful Hungarian company like Richter. They have innovative therapy, Vylar, which I'm familiar with from the U.S. Obviously, they partner with AbbVie in the U.S. And I think in some ways that actually has helped the multinational companies for a Hungarian firm to have an innovative medicine. We've seen that even last year during the EU presidency with some of the legislation that that Hungary was trying to negotiate on behalf of the member states with the GPL, the General Pharma legislation, as well as even the urban wastewater treatment directive. So I think that there's some, like I said, synergies that we can leverage if we work together. So I don't see it as competitive or in favor of another, but I have some other colleagues that may feel different.
Well, just before we come to your colleagues, this is the first time we haven't had a member of the government on the panel, and we have always tried so the point of this is not to be combative. It is to be collegiate and to find synergies through this platform, best practices to pick up from experiences in other countries. Not to say that everything that goes on here is right or wrong, but to say that there are other options out there, and maybe we can learn from those. So thank you for that. But I just wanted to respond to that one point. I don't mind being provocative.
No, I think it's a really good question, because I mean, to be very fair, like even as I've come and I've definitely heard different sentiments from even my own team, and I just try to, I think, generally look at the big picture. I think we're all trying to drive availability of our medicines, and if you think about Hungarian firms, I mean, if I'm being general, have largely generic medicines, and innovative companies need generic medicines as well, and our innovative products eventually become generic. So I think that there's a lot of synergies that we could leverage.
Thank you. Novartis, of course, is a Swiss company, a European company in the broadest sense. Sàndor, is the take any different from an Asian company, a Japanese company, or indeed your own personal view?
Let me share with you something from the background. We have received the questions before the session a few days ago, Yesterday, I had a chance to ask some representatives of local manufacturers from Aegis. As yesterday, we had a board meeting, and I set the scene, and I asked the general manager of Aegis about how can he feel that whether we treat it equally or not. And his answer was the following: we are suffering differently. No, I'm not joking, and I think that this is the essence of the whole story. Just imagine that most of the innovative companies on the AIPM side, we are commercially oriented companies. We are selling drugs, technologies on the local market. Maybe the local manufacturers have a different approach. They have a focus on the manufacturing as well. And you know that from this point of view, they may face different challenges. And I can recall that in the last couple of few years, there was a period where there were some restrictions, very painful restrictions on the, the inclusion of the new innovative drugs. Even today we are suffering from the same issue. But I can recall that there was some penalty taxes for the local manufacturers as well, which, to be honest, I really couldn't even understood how the government could treat so cruelly the local manufacturing companies. Maybe this is not the most diplomatic description, but what I can see, that today the whole industry itself is not in the focus of the attention of the government. Today, I think that neither the distribution of the new technologies, neither supporting maybe the generic companies to help them to fill the gap and provide solutions for thousands, tens of thousands of patients. And I think that including the local manufacturers, today, we are generating problems and cost for the governments where they may see that maybe this is not the best place to invest. And I think that I'm always happy to have such a discussion like this. I know that sharing this concern about that maybe the whole industry together in a coalition should raise our voice and say something that this is not sustainable anymore, which means that maybe today there's a penalty tax for the innovative companies who are paying maybe different, not 20, but something else. Who knows what might come. And at the same time, maybe the local manufacturers may suffer that maybe some special taxes about their extra profits, how we learned the lesson a few years ago, how the government described the revenue of the companies. From my perspective, as a Japanese company, I've never felt like that we treated differently like the local ones. We feel that we can suffer differently, but everyone is suffer. I do hope that the new era should come, especially because what I can see that the discussion with Bence was the following, that what I can see that the shortage of the resources in healthcare is so painful that makes the whole system unsustainable.
Thank you for that. Boban, yeah, you obviously don't have direct dealings with Hungary, but you have a European view from your perspective. Do you see the way the setup is here as being supportive, or so is it encouraging synergy, or is it encouraging different suffering?
Thank you. So you are right, definitely. I'm coming from an international perspective and saying international is not global. I will focus mostly on this part of the world, so CE and Baltics and Southern Europe. So as I'm not familiar with the dynamics of and specifics of Hungarian market, I cannot comment, but I can share some general principles. So to me, it might sound that some local governments are favorizing domestic producers. But to me, it's driven mostly by the need to fulfill budget restrictions. So in this part of the world, majority of the companies are generics, while the innovation is coming from the internationals. So the government's trying to balance between bringing the innovation to the market and on the other side, respecting the need to stay within set budgets might leave the industry with the impression that some of the companies are favorized. Which I believe, I truly believe this is not the case. This is not the intentional, first of all. And secondly, speaking about internationals, it's really important that we have transparency and predictability of the reimbursement processes. So this is something that the government should equally treat any of the players in the market. Because Bence said that some of the players are withdrawing from the market. So if you prevent by those policies influx of the innovation, then there is no medical progress. So also from the perspective of internationals, in addition to predictability, transparency is very critical, because we need to clearly understand what are the processes, what are the timelines, because all of us are having some commitments toward the headquarters. And finally, I believe that the only right way is to respect the cost effectiveness, to respect the budget restraints, but also to enable the influx of the innovation. Otherwise, patients will not benefit from the innovations that are coming from big pharma companies.
So the important takeaway, I guess, would be, and I understand that you can't talk to Hungarian specifics, but this is a fairly general approach by governments across the region. So whether you're here or from your homelands, from the Balkans or wherever, it's pretty much the same picture. Exactly. Colette, did you want to come back or not?
No,
that's fine. Okay, so we've painted a general picture and we've identified some needs and some challenges. What do the pharma firms, and since we have you two here, we're going to talk about innovatives rather than generics. What do your firms want from the government? And I can already think of three things that would smooth the playing field. I mean, I think Bence kind of set us up for this, but it's.
I mean, I think the maybe easy and quick answer would be transparency and predictability.
There you go.
Yeah, I think those were the two that jump out at me. I mean, obviously, I like the way that you put it. We suffer differently, but I think one of the challenges that we have right now is just kind of understanding kind of how and when we're going to have the new innovative medicines be available to Hungarian patients. And I was really struck by the slide that you show. Obviously, I've been here in Hungary for a year, but to see kind of the last 10-year horizon of the publication of the bulletin and seeing now that we're on a trajectory of every other year. Well, there are some elements of, I would say, the access process that run a little bit more smoothly, like the clinical evaluation. I think once we move past that and we try to get to really the budget negotiation and the economic elements, that's where I think things become a little bit less transparent, delays take over, and the fact that we don't have rolling approvals for brands. We have to kind of wait until everybody gets at one point the access is brought to the market. So the last thing I would say, in addition to transparency and predictability, is just an opportunity for stakeholder engagement as well, partnership. If you think about the foundation that has recently launched last year, there's still a lot of unanswered questions. And if you think about the opportunity we could have had once the foundation was announced, an opportunity to maybe have a seat at the table and have some open dialogue around some of the challenge that we could foresee, both from a foundation perspective as well as from an industry perspective. I think we could have maybe overcome some of those challenges maybe in advance of the launch. But we are at this point having some dialogue with them, so I'm optimistic about a path forward.
It's at the risk of being provocative again. This government has long had a sort of, I suppose we could say, a Trumpian approach, which is you launch the thing and then you tell people about it, and then you try and work out.
I'm becoming more familiar with both now.
Sàndor.
I have a wishful thinking. Maybe one day I would open maybe a local media, okay, and would be an announcement about that the third point of the agenda of the government is discussing the inclusion of new innovative drugs. And my vision can be originated that maybe the healthcare itself would be such an important topic for the key decision makers that maybe the government could discuss it. Many years ago, I've seen an agenda of the French Parliament, and that was point I was totally shocked and impressed. They discussed the menu in the kindergartens. That was on the plate of the Parliament. Just imagine that what if, I think this is not something that just a wishful thinking, that maybe the healthcare itself would be so important for the key decision makers that they might discuss it. And that would be the point that I would be confident that a positive change might come. I fully agree with Colette that the lack of transparency is our daily life. The predictability itself, how to say that we should have a magic ball, and we might expect from our market access colleagues that maybe I would ask András, what is in your magic ball? And he can predict something. In most of the cases, he fails. So I think that the predictability is something that could help a lot for us, especially as the business period in pharma is so long.
Yeah.
Okay, the longer the period of the business, the higher the need for transparency and predictability, unless we can hardly operate on a very effective manner. Just imagine that we have a limited time for our innovative drugs on the local market, and in some cases happens that this time is not enough to include a new technology in Hungary, and the generic enters the market before the original product would have been even included. I think this is so shameful for us.
Just to reflect on that, I had that particular case. So it took so long time to get into the market, to get reimbursement, that the product reached almost LOE. Yes. It was 1 year before LOE.
Yes.
Again, not discussing Hungarian situation, just to reflect on what was said already. Transparency, predictability, many times repeated words, but also restrictions are very critical because in some markets we are facing so huge paybacks, taxbacks, limitations that makes the internationals somehow decide not to get into the market. So the market is missing the opportunity to bring the innovation and to let the patients benefit from that. And it happens that some markets in this region are put in a second or even third wave of launches, which is, I could say, eventually 5 years after Germany, France, and some other big markets, which is very pity.
And that's true across the region? Or I mean, are there levels even within this region where some markets are
there are some markets, I can freely mention that, for instance, Slovenia is having fast-track approval. So,
Slovenia?
Yeah, exactly. But in some markets, it takes way too long. It leaves the discouraging impression, and those markets are missing the opportunity.
Yeah, so that is worrying. I mean, the idea that you get the generic before you get the innovative seems crazy. But perhaps, as you say, what we need is to equip all of our innovative firms with crystal balls, and that's the way forward. Let's talk about who is responsible for determining market access to Hungary. Is it purely the government? Does the EU have a role in this? Should the EU have a role in this, or does that just complicate matters that are already complicated unnecessarily? We'll start with you, Sàndor.
To step into the market, in most of the cases, is an economic act and process, driven by clinical data.
Yep.
We have to divide it. I think that the current intention and the new regulation from February, which would be on a European level, a common assessment of the clinical data, makes sense to make the life of the member countries a little bit easier. It's great. which means that maybe that will be a common effort of the member countries to put together the expertise, processes, maybe to speed up and maybe to produce even a higher quality health technology assessment. But this is the number one step. The number second is always talking about the money, which means that will be decided on a local level. So from one perspective, I'm really happy to see that there's this initiative on a European level, which might speed up the process, but at the same time, I remain skeptic on a local level, as what we have seen, that we submit our dossiers, more or less good assessments and analytics. But at the end of the day, we might see that maybe the inclusion into the reimbursement system, there's a delay, or we submit for the first line and the exception is in the third or the fourth line, which is not even indicated, just to mention a few of the potential drawbacks of the current system. From this point of view, I think that we're always going back to the root, and the root is coming from the fact that the shortage of resources, no money.
Colette?
I agree very, very much with Sàndor. I think, when we think about the EU HTA, I think it is a positive step forward. And I think that if you can harmonize, the clinical assessment, that makes sense, because it then has an opportunity to free up resources in each of the member states. But we also know that the economic assessment will still continue to take place locally. And I think to Sàndor's point, this is, where we run into many of the challenges that we face from a timing and availability perspective. I do think that in countries, so if we maybe step outside of Hungary for a moment, and in countries where you have a rolling approval process as well, where brands are able to come to the market based on when their economic assessment is over, you could see a shortening of the approval process through now by having the centralized EU HTA. I don't necessarily think this is going to be the case here in Hungary because of the step that we need to wait for the legislation and the publishing of the publication. And then just one other kind of reflection, and I think Sàndor kind of touched on this as well, is the clinical assessment right now in Hungary I think works fairly well. I mean the criteria is pretty clear, the timing is pretty consistently on time. So that's not really the bottleneck or the challenge that we face. It's really the economic point, which still will be managed locally, and the EU doesn't have a direct influence over at this point.
I've heard from many innovatives that Hungary has certain natural benefits. The most obvious one, well actually that's not a natural benefit, but the most obvious benefit that Hungary has is this single access point, so the data mine. So in terms of taking that data, you have opportunities here that you wouldn't necessarily have if you were operating in Germany, for example, because everything's down to the state level there. So Hungary is not without opportunities. It's how you open those up, I guess.
Yeah, and I think, if I'm being very optimistic, I would say maybe a benefit of the EU HTA process is now we can remove resources and effort and focus on kind of doing the clinical assessment and put more time into the economic challenge that we face, which is really, again, where the bottleneck is. Yes, the data opportunity that we have here is significant. And I think it's valuable for clinical research, for a number of things in terms of even driving an HEOR kind of evaluation and assessment from an HTA perspective. But again, I don't know how I don't know that that's a direct link to improving the speed of the availability.
Okay.
We've
rather brilliantly moved on to the next question, which was going to be about the HTA, which is the European Union's health technology assessment. Boban, do you think, from your perspective, do you think this EU initiative is useful? Is it going in the right direction? Can it open up things?
Yeah. So my answer is will be short because it's partially already discussed. Basically, the ultimate decision maker will still be the government and the mayor. So even though, as said, this might give the opportunity for local teams to free up some space to focus on other assessments, and the aim of this HTA initiative is to decrease the burden on local authorities. Still, all the decisions will be driven either by budget restrictions, government priorities, and so on. So, in some markets it could be helpful, but at the end of the day, personally, I don't expect big changes because it was not the root cause of all the delays.
Yeah. As Colette says, it isn't the bottleneck. The money is the bottleneck. Sàndor, do you want to reflect any more on that, or are you quite pessimistic enough as it is?
I was thinking about to say something positive about that.
Go on then. Say something positive.
I found 2 points when I reviewed the new European HTA process itself. The first one is what I like very much. The whole process and the whole data will be totally transparent for everyone. I think this is great for the healthcare professionals, even for the patients, the patient organizations, which mean that a very thorough analysis would be available all of the languages, and this is the common knowledge of the whole European Union, which means that very high quality data would be available for the clinicians, the patients, and the patient organization. I think that could generate very meaningful dialogues in the society. This is my expectation. The second one, and I like it very much, and this is about that this could even fertilize the local processes when they set maybe the local patient journeys, which mean that, and from this point of view, what Robin, you mentioned about that, maybe the Hungarian data treasury of the sick fund would be utilized maybe when we will be able to set quite easily the local data set to conclude that this is the Hungarian way of the current treatment, and the new technology could or should include this or that way into the daily clinical practice. I think that from this point of view that Hungary will be one of the fastest contributor to the new health technology assessment, at least from the clinical data point of view. This is the 2 positive points.
Well, we do like to be positive where we can, so thank you for that. Boban, we're about to get into some very technical Hungary, or rather some very specific Hungarian details, so I'll spare you from that. Before we get there, I think perhaps it would be useful if you could share with us what it is that Phoenix does to try and help pharmaceutical companies navigate market access. That's, after all, what we're talking about. So what is it that Phoenix brings to the table to help these guys achieve their ends?
Yes, as you said in the intro, I'm coming from Pharma unit. So basically, the expertise of my team spans across sales, marketing, scientific engagement, market access, and so on and so on. So a few years ago, with the development of representation business, we also developed in-house market access team, which is fully capable of delivering all the requirements on all the requirements and meet the payers' needs. So why we decided to go into direction? First of all, there are companies that are having very limited resources. For instance, you might have company having launch every third or fourth year, so it's not profitable to keep the high volume market access teams in the company. That's the first point. The second point was about markets where companies decide to divest the portfolio, so to get out of the market. And the third situation was where some of the companies needed the support from external partners. So we went into the direction. We established in-house team, which is set at 2 layers, so local and regional. Why is this important? Because we need to understand the EU framework, but also to understand the local requirements. And also we are partnering with third parties across all the markets especially when it comes to development of local world evidence, which are critical sometimes for the submission processes. And finally, what I would say is that the big advantage of Phoenix is that all those categories are vertically integrated. So as said, in my team we are having sales, marketing, market access. Also, we are starting from distribution. We are having regulatory PV and so on and so on. So being part of this closed circle is really huge competitive. Actually, having market access within this circle is a huge competitive advantage of Phoenix. And there is a trend that those services are more and more needed from the big pharma companies, but also from some local manufacturers for the reasons I've already shared. So far we have been successful in getting reimbursement for a few innovative assets, mainly oncology and vaccines, and we will see what will happen in the future.
But you would say the decision a few years ago to take that step was the right. I mean, it's been clearly you're not going to sit there and say.
We were listening to the needs of manufacturers and local teams, and we realized that this is the service that is critically important to the companies because it's the entry point to the market. If you are lacking resources, capacity, knowledge to get into the market, then you're missing the commercial potential of the product. So
and you do that at a regional level, so.
Regional and local, so
yeah, okay.
Regional and local teams.
All right, cool. Thank you for that. We're now going to get. I mean, perhaps I should ask you guys: is there any kind of reflection on that you would like to make? Don't have to.
No, I would just say that I think Phoenix is, a great partner, and we partner with them in a number of different ways, from a wholesale perspective, pharmacy perspective, and I absolutely know. I think when we talk about the availability of brands in many markets, it is important to have options for partnering to make sure that your medicines can be available. Yeah. So I think that they're a great partner in many of those cases.
If I may add something maybe to the role of the wholesaler. Thanks to the government and the economy that we are can see today in Hungary, that the pharmaceutical wholesalers they have a job enrichment about that they are getting to be a bank as well. As you know, that the outstandings of the hospitals in some cases challenging the distribution and how to manage the debt of the hospitals, and I can see that the pharmaceutical wholesalers has a new role. So this is not just about that selling drugs or taking care about the distribution and the quality and the safety of the supply, but at the same time you have to manage the fundings as well.
That's absolutely right. So we act as a bank. But what is important is not many people are aware of the fact that beyond wholesale and retail, where Phoenix is a leader in Europe, we are having this, I would say, sophisticated service that closes the full the loop.
It's interesting you said closes, because I was thinking, as you were speaking earlier, that it seems to me that what you're doing is, and it's so important, is you are not operating in silos, but bringing everything together so that you get a much more holistic approach. Yeah. Okay. Now let's get down to some Hungarian nitty-gritty. Starting this year, by which I mean detail, nothing more sinister than that. So starting this year, and Bence mentioned it in his presentation, we have the Batthyány-Strattmann László Foundation assuming responsibility for managing applications for exceptional drug funding in Hungary. The foundation will receive its annual funding from the government, which says the aim is to streamline the application process by making it more efficient and responsive to patients' needs. So it's a very lofty aim. I don't think there's anyone in this room that would disagree with that. The question always, the devil is always in the detail. So what do we think, guys, about this? Is this potentially a game changer? And there is a danger this will be a provocative question again, Colette. So I apologise. Is this potentially a game changer? Let's be optimistic. Is it dangerously flawed, or is it somewhere in between those? We'll start with you, Colette.
I think you have to know that I actually really like provocative questions. No.
I'm just changing question 7 now.
No, I think I probably would say that it's too soon to tell. I think the introduction of, and I'll just say the foundation for simplicity.
Yeah.
But the foundation, yeah. I think the introduction of the foundation, obviously, it does mark a big shift in the reimbursement process here in Hungary, and I do think there's some positives. So I'll also take a note from Sàndor and maybe start with some of the positives. I mean, Ben showed a slide earlier. Obviously, the funding they have significant funding that they've invested in the foundation. And when you look at the overall pharma budget with the foundation in 2024 compared to 2025, we see an increase. So I think that there's a positive element there. When you also consider the burden that the NPP was under in the past, and now maybe having a centralized, dedicated group of individuals that have the opportunity to do approvals in this case, you can see that there is opportunity to give access to patients for diseases or medicines that they haven't maybe had access to before. So from a patient quality perspective, patient satisfaction and outcome perspective, again, could be some positive outcomes there. But I would say I think the challenge is, again, I think we have a saying that the proof is in the pudding in the U.S. And what that really means is I think that, the foundation launched just over a month ago. There's still a lot of open and unanswered questions right now. And I think that's, what we need to kind of manage through. Anytime that there's something new that comes into play, you're always going to have a transition period. There's always going to be hurdles that we're going to face. Some foreseen and some unforeseen. So I really believe that a lot of the success will depend on how the foundation is able to manage through some of these difficulties. And I think first and foremost for us as innovative companies, it's really deeply understanding the operational framework and capacity of the foundation, which to me right now and our team is still pretty unclear. So we don't really understand quite how the eligibility criteria is going to work, what the timing of the approval process is going to look like. So we go back to that transparency and predictability element again that we're really still trying to understand. A few other elements that I think are really important. While I highlight the benefit of the budget, which is considerable, it's unclear now what will happen if they run out of funds. So I think we've seen that in the past, right, where we've overspent the budget in the past with NAOC. So what will happen now from a foundation perspective if they've allocated all of their funds early in the year and we get to November, December? So these are some elements that I think we need to get some clarity on. And then I think also a big one for us, and this is something that I think will be important for us to figure out as well, is how as multinational companies we can contract with the foundation. I mean, obviously in the past our contracts have always been with the government and with NAOC, and now this will be kind of a change in our operating procedure and how we just can very, I would say, transactionally contract with the foundation to ensure that our medicines are available to them. So these are some of the things that we're needing to work through. They're open to discussions, which is great. I know our team has a meeting today with the foundation. Hopefully we can get some more clarity. But going back to that point earlier about stakeholder management in advance, I think some of these are foreseen challenges that maybe if we work together, we could have tackled before the launch, but we are where we are, and I think we'll try and tackle that as soon as we can.
Thank you. If the proof is in the pudding, you've got to have the right recipe to get to testing the pudding. What do we think, Sàndor? Is it a good recipe, or is it a potentially good recipe?
I've never tasted before a pudding like that. Never. The intention is, I think that great. I try to be positive, at least from the perspective that maybe this could be a solution, which is it's a burden on the sick fund for many years, and that has been declared. Maybe the first time was 7-8 years ago that the sick fund wanted to somehow to erase it. which means that the individual reimbursement framework itself always was a hardly manageable part of the operation of the local sick fund. And instead of just getting rid of and push all the drugs from this budget to the big budget, to the regular general reimbursement budget, they separated it, okay? This is something like in the homework. I don't like the vacuum cleaning, so I separated to the cleaning lady. But the need it remained. I really do not know, and this is, as you may say, that the detail in the devil in the details. Let's see how they operate. There are two concerns that already raised. One is about the timing. We should not forget that many patients has already a late decision about the access to some life-saving drugs. I think this is very, very important to understand that we lost already more than 1 month. And you know that in a patient with a very difficult cancer situation, 1 month could be his or her life. I think that this is something important. And I share the concern from Colette. No one knows what would happen if the budget would not be enough. In the past, whenever the individual reimbursement budget overflow the previously set limit, there was always a consolidation from the E-fund. Am I right, Bence? So today, as this is totally a separate function, and no, I really cannot see any link between the sick fund and the foundation. If they would run out of money, no one knows how it would be consolidated. And I fully agree. Let's see in October, November. What could happen? And you know that from one perspective, I think that this is not a joke. As just imagine, in most of the cases, the decision about chronic therapies, which means that maybe the patient would start the therapy in May, and he or she should receive it in December and November, and not wait to the next budget period of the government. Okay? I think this is something that could be considered, and let's see, I'm positive. I'm cheering for them to set as fast as they can, to have a valuable discussion with all the stakeholders, sign the contract as soon as possible with the companies, and let's start. I'm not naive. Would be difficulties, but I think that if would be a meaningful discussion with all the involved partners, we can solve it. But the money should come from the government if the budget would not be enough till the end of the year.
So, I mean, it would help if the government said now, okay, if there is any shortfall, we will underwrite it.
You know, and maybe this is a Hungarian folk tradition. All the fund is underestimated. I've never seen, especially not in the healthcare, not even a year. Bence can confirm it. Never happened that the budget would have been enough. Never happened. And I have a feeling that this 40-something billion forints sounds a great achievement and a big chunk of money. But when they start to spend it, sooner or later, they will say, oops, we are getting closer to the end. And this end will not, how to say, in line with the calendar.
It's a really, really important point. So let's talk about the process for announcing funding for new innovative medicines in Hungary. Is that fit for purpose? Does it deliver value for money? Are assessments made on a frequent enough basis? Colette?
So I can answer the last question first. Probably no.
That's also a folk tradition.
Yeah. So, I mean, the overall process, I think we've kind of touched on throughout today through our conversation. You know, I think it's, if we oversimplify it, it's, you know, the clinical assessment, which includes the clinical evaluation versus the risks, some of the HTA analysis, and then we have the kind of the is there enough budget to allow this medicine to be available, and if so, to what patient population?
Yeah.
And I think, the first part of the process overall runs pretty well. Like I said before, it's pretty timely. We have, I would say, strong clarity in kind of what we need to do to manage that first part of the process. And the second part is continues to be the challenge. So for us, it's, again, I feel like I'm going back to a couple of things we stated before, but it's really around what happens beyond that point, how we can get more clarity in the budget process, how we can ensure that our innovative medicines are available to as broad population as possible, in line with the EMA approval. And then I think an opportunity for rolling inclusions would also really speed up the process here. So I think that those would be improvements that we can consider. In terms of the value framework, I think that the intention is there, again, with the HTA, but I think Sàndor mentioned it before. I think, really when it comes down to it, while we do a lot of the work and the rigor up front around some of these elements, it really, I think, oftentimes comes down to, is there enough money? Do we have the budget to really fund this? And if we have money for this brand, what is the population that we could actually fund?
Sàndor?
A few days ago, we had the discussion during the board meeting of the AIPM, and Pavel mentioned something I liked very much. You know that whenever we are talking about the budget, there's a second thought, and this is about a cost. If we remain with this view that the budget is to cover the cost of something, I think that there will never be such a budget that would be enough to cover the cost. Mm-hmm. But what if the health would not be a cost, but maybe a value or an asset or something like that? And when we spend the money, this is not covering the expenditures, but investing. Because when we are talking about the cost, we are just throwing the money away, okay? But when do we invest? We would like to something in return. And this is the value of the health. I do believe that maybe, and this is the role of the whole industry, maybe to change a little bit the narrative, what we can see today in the media, and try to shift this mindset from the cost toward the values. And once the values would be the key driver of thinking about the money and the budget, immediately we would be much closer to the so-called enough budget, which is never enough.
And just for sake of clarity, we should say that, and it's a comment we've made in this roundtable in previous iterations of it. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. It could be America, it could be the UK. There is never enough money for the health budget. And in fact, if you...
But we can strive for it. You're getting closer.
We should try to get as close as possible, absolutely. Boban, you've heard kind of like themes come through from the Hungarian experience. Funnily enough, money seems to be one of those that keeps cropping up. Trust, transparency, credibility, there are all kinds of things there. You have this bigger helicopter view, if you like, a Europe-wide view. What are some of the best practices that you've seen that maybe we could implement here in Hungary that would help? As we've just said, there's always going to be a shortfall of money, but there can be practices of how we get that money and how we invest that money rather than treat it as a cost.
So basically coming from the fact who decision maker is, we need to understand their needs, payers' needs. So we are all having, the first and the most important and critical element is reimbursement dossier. That should be supported by all clinical data and other stuff that mostly are coming from global access teams. So we are all having that. But my learning is that whenever possible, local real-world evidence should be part of the reimbursement dossier, because this helps the local authorities better assess the situation, better understand the impact, and not the cost but the value. I fully agree with you, because I just had the other idea. Why we are obliged to put the seat belt? Because the government wants to decrease some costs, like to, I don't know, inability to work and so on. So by giving patient opportunity to live healthy lives, we are making them productive. So going back to my previous thought, real-world evidence is really critical, because I said it makes it gives the ground floor to the authorities to balance between cost restrictions and the benefits that the therapies are bringing. I don't know what is the situation in Hungary, whether this is part of the reimbursement dossier or not, whether it is mandatory or optional, but this helps a lot.
Do either of you want to pick up on that point, that last one?
Maybe one thing to add. There was a period of time that I had the chance maybe to work in other Eastern European countries with the local health insurance funds. And what I have found in the Baltics, in many situations we might see that even on a local sick fund level there's a shortage of people to do the daily work. And in the Baltics what I experienced, that they were always at least in time, which means that whenever we get in contact with them, asking them for feedbacks or in a debate or something like that, I felt always that there was always something I can turn to. Not here. In many cases, and I really do not want to blame the people working in sick fund, but there's maybe the double or the triple of the staff should be there to provide a minimum service level. And the service is the dialogue with the stakeholders, to talk to the companies, talk to the healthcare professionals associations, or even to the patient associations. Know people who can be involved in meaningful dialogues. So what I would see, I would like to see as soon as possible, maybe more people on the other side, where they have capacity to think, to talk, and maybe at the end of the day, to make decisions.
I can confirm for Baltics that this is still the fact, but to me it's more about respecting timelines rather than having or not having sufficient resources.
In other words, the deadline is the really important thing, and you have to hit that.
Yeah, as said in legislation, it's respected.
Speaking as a journalist, adherence to deadlines is very, very important. And I'm not always convinced that the rest of the world fully understands that. In just a second, I want to open it up to questions for the floor, but just before we get there, Colette, I wanted to pick your brain very quickly. You started off in the United States, you are from the United States. You've also spent time in Switzerland, which is not a surprise given Novartis, and you've been here for a year now. Given that you have that sort of raft of experiences, how does Hungary compare with Switzerland and the United States? And are there things, because obviously you can't compare oranges and lemons, but are there things from your experience that you would want to be introduced here, or indeed vice versa, I suppose?
So from a market access perspective, I would say my reflection on working in a few markets is that there is no perfect market access process. I mean, I tend to focus on availability and speed to approval as a really important criteria, because I think that's very much in line with our aspiration to have our drugs available to the patients as soon as possible. So yeah, I think when you compare the U.S., I think some of the benefits that you have there is we know that the data supports the fact that the FDA is faster to generate approvals than what we see from an EMA perspective. We know that in the US, there's many more expedited reviews that are approved than in the EMA. So I think that definitely lends itself to, again, the fact that we do have broader drug and faster drug availability in the US. But now when you're speaking specifically to Hungary, I think there is also differences, of course, in the healthcare system. So, I also worked in Italy, and in Europe in general, obviously we have the universal healthcare.
Yep.
So a benefit of universal healthcare, while we tend to have to wait much longer for approval of medicines, is that once the drug becomes available, that equity from a country perspective is there. So if you have a condition and you meet the criteria, you have access to the medicine. Mm-hmm. And this is not necessarily the case in the US. So, we have fast approval, but then equity will really be determined based on your insurance, whether it's private, public. Your out-of-pocket costs could be very, very different depending upon the insurance that you have. So there's some key differences there. And then if I just give maybe one more example, I know obviously from an EU perspective, Germany kind of stands out. I think they have pretty fast regulatory approval. But interestingly, when I was moving from Italy to Hungary, you look at a lot of data and criteria, and you see when you look at the weight indicators, for instance, that Italy is much faster than Hungary. But some key differences again is around the centralized element that we have in Hungary. Once you have the approval, you have the approval. In Italy, for instance, once you get the national approval, then you have 20 more reviews because you have to do every review at the regional level. So it still could take an additional 12 to 18 months. So I do think there's technicalities in many markets that make it very complex. But I would just say overall, to me, if I was a patient, and this is maybe what I go back to. If I was a patient and I needed a medicine, I think, again, the most important thing for me would be, do I have access to the medicine when I need it? So it comes back to, I think, how fast we can get the approvals, how broad the availability is, and I think this is where we have some opportunities to improve in Hungary, for sure.
All right, one last provocative question. And it's funny you said patient, because that's exactly what I was thinking. Bearing in mind, you can compare the American example, the Swiss example, the Italian example, now the Hungarian example, and I don't wish this on you in any way, but if you were to be ill, where would you rather be ill?
Well, yeah. I don't know if it's fair to say. I would go back home, to be honest. I would go to the U.S. First of all, I speak the language. That's a big, I think, feeling of security. I would go home because my parents are there and my son is there. But yeah, I'm also much more familiar, I would say, with the healthcare system there. So, I've at times in my life personally had to be a healthcare advocate for people that I love. I've worked on this side of the healthcare system, so I feel that I have a knowledge that could probably help me a lot more there. It's not a negative statement about the quality of physicians here, because I actually believe that in Italy and Switzerland and definitely in Hungary, we have some really, really talented and smart clinical professionals. But it's probably more of a comfort for me that would send me there.
That's fine, and it was also a totally unfair question. Ladies and gentlemen, do we have any questions from the floor? I have a willing assistant who will take actually, Sàndor, can I grab your phone? Any questions from the floor? We're actually organised this time. We have a mic ready to run. No? A gentleman who has often been, in fact always been, on our round table. I hope you enjoyed your breakfast, sir.
Excellent. The first time that I really could enjoy it.
Your question.
Please allow me a comment to Sàndor. I cannot leave this without comment that you said that the pharmaceutical wholesalers are going into the banking business. We have in Germany saying that the perfect crime is banking business. And I think this is not the way where we would like to go. Honestly, the situation is any company has has a balance sheet, and there are limits what you can do. And seeing the margins what we have in wholesale, 4%, we just cannot finance it. The factoring at the banks is higher.
Yeah.
So what I want to say, it stays a common job to speak to the payer that you cannot have low prices and long-term financing at the same time.
Makes sense.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have a question for? You've got some great brains here, and obviously I'm not talking about me. There's nothing you want to take up with them? No issues? You did a really good job, guys. They have no questions at all. Well, in that case, let me thank you and try and sum this up. And there's during Bence's presentation, Balázs leaned over to me and said, it's a good job I don't have to summarize this. I don't know what you're going to do. And I thought, well, the best way of summarizing this, I think, because there's so much knowledge there, is to look back at the things that really leap out. And I think we have some common themes coming through. I mean, we started very early on with Colette saying we're not competing, we're looking for synergy. And I think that's really important. That has always been one of the approaches that we've tried to take with this roundtable, is to say that it's not confrontational, it's collegiate, and how can we learn and move forward together. I also like the idea of us suffering differently, and I think there has to be a realization that you know, like George always said, we are all equal, but some of us less equal than others or more equal than others. Transparency and predictability, those were words that kept coming through. And you could say that about any situation, I guess, but if people are asking for it, there is a need for it. And actually, it's really perhaps unfortunate we don't have a government rep with us this morning, because I think we need to continue to emphasize these messages that you know, there are steps that need to be taken. It would be nice if we were involved in the conversations before the decisions were made. And by the way, pharma isn't the only sector out there that would ask that of the government. But it, you know, it's important. And then we come to the really important thing, which you can never shy away from, which is money. Money is a bottleneck, but possibly the speed of decisions. But really, you can throw money at the problem, and you can waste a lot of it, but you can also help smooth that situation. If your options are more money or no money, I guarantee you pretty much everyone is going to go for the more money option. Meaningful dialogue, local knowledge. Boban right at the end said we have to understand the decision maker, and we have to provide them with real world evidence, and I guess at the local level that has to be local real world evidence. So I think we have covered a lot of ground. I think there's a lot of food for thought to take away. There will very shortly be more networking, so you can perhaps have arguments over coffee while looking at a copy of Pharma Review, obviously. So with that in mind, I'm going to call an end to this part of the morning, and thank once again our roundtablists. That's a word I've just invented, by the way. Our roundtable panelists: Dr. Sàndor Lévai of Takeda, Hungary, Colette Matz of Novartis, Hungary, and Dr. Boban Milojkovic of Phoenix Group. Please, ladies and gentlemen, give them all a round of applause.